Welcome to Front Office Pros. I'm Steve, and this is Joe, and we're here to talk to you today about starts and sits for Week 15, the first round of your fantasy football playoffs. It's a big, important week, Joe. So we're going to be talking about a ceiling play, a floor play, and a sit play. So, Joe, let's start talking about the quarterbacks here first. Our ceiling play of the week is quarterback Dak Prescott going up against the Jaguars.
Yeah, Jaguars defense, you can definitely pass on them. Their secondary is not the best. And I know Prescott's kind of the up and down, and that's ultimately kind of what made him the ceiling play here, because he always kind of has the risk to kind of play the way he did last week against the Texans, and that offense kind of struggled for most of the game there until they absolutely had to have it. But
Yeah.
I think he'll have a better week this week against the Jags, though.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things about Dak Prescott. He is one of those quarterbacks that gets talked about as possibly an elite quarterback. I think maybe part of the reason why is because he plays for the Dallas Cowboys. And there are some games that he really shows out, but then there's some other games he just lays an egg. And it's like, what on earth happened? And so I think going up against Jacksonville, it's not a horrible matchup, but you just don't know what Dak Prescott is going to show up when he plays. But I think he's a good ceiling option and could give you the points, especially if you're chasing them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he has the weapons. That's the thing. He's got the weapons to do so, to give you that ceiling. It's just a matter of how is he going to play. And I think, the Jags, they gave up quite a bit in the first half of the game to Derrick Henry, but in the second half, they really clamped him down. So I don't know if they'll be able to run as effectively as they're used to. So he might have to throw a lot more. And with Lamb and Gallup, Noah Brown showing out with Dalton Schultz, I mean, he should be able to be a good ceiling play.
Yeah, so our floor play of the week is quarterback Aaron Rodgers. He's going up against the LA Rams.
Yeah, Rodgers has kind of had an up and down year so far, but I like him to be able to exploit the secondary of the Rams here and turn out a pretty safe game coming off the bye. I think you could do worse.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Joe, but sometimes I think when I am trying to determine who's in my lineup, sometimes I just have this mindset that's like, oh, the Rams, yeah, they're a great defense. But then when you actually look into it, you have to understand, like, Aaron Donald's out, right? Like, the Rams defense is not the same Rams defense that you maybe thought of last year. Not to say they still don't have good players. They've got Jalen Ramsey, but it's one of those things that sometimes I have to remind myself, like, okay, who is a good and who's a bad defense, when it comes to, defending the pass and defending the run. But I think with Rodgers being on the bye week, and having that extra time, I think is going to be helpful. Might have Romeo Doubs back, has been doing really well with connecting with Christian Watson. So I think he's going to give you he's a bankable floor play. I think he's going to get you a solid amount of points. Could even have somewhat of a ceiling, but either way, I think he's going to do well.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, I think he's a high floor player. I think he's got a potential, like you said, to get that ceiling. And got an extra week with the bye week to heal that thumb too. I think that'll help.
Absolutely. So our sit of the week, Joe, and this is the guy we've been talking about quite a bit lately, is quarterback Tua Tagovailoa going at Buffalo. Looks like it's going to snow, Joe. We don't like that at all for him.
No, as we've talked about, I mean, it was 55 degrees at SoFi, and they brought in the portable propane heaters to SoFi Stadium, and it's like, come on. Now you got the cold Buffalo Stadium night game. Talking 7 inches of snow with accumulation throughout the game, just not looking good. And then with the uncertainty of the health of Tyreek Hill, even Waddle's been kind of down since tweaking that ankle injury. He hasn't missed any games, but he definitely hasn't been the same. I'm staying away from Tua this week.
Yeah, I kind of like what it's interesting. I don't know how many people heard it, but Josh Allen had like an interesting comment where they were asking. I think it was in Kyle Brandt's basement. I was talking about, do you feel like you kind of have that advantage, with the weather? Do you think it's a real impact? And he made a good point. And earlier on in the season, he's like, well, yeah, absolutely. But also Miami does too, because when you're in Miami, the sun is baking on you on the sideline. And in the first time that they played, Buffalo really outmatched Miami, but there were so many players. It was a scorcher. So many players went down with cramping issues, having to get fluids. And as a result, they just weren't able to finish the game. Really, I mean, it just the conditions really affected the outcome. So I could totally see that happening on the opposite side. And just based on Tua's struggles recently, and like you said, with the injury status or how healthy is Tyreek Hill and Waddle, I think they could be in for some trouble. I think the Bills really want to, kind of have a statement game, and that they are the AFC East, division champs sort of deal.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt they want to put a stamp on this game. I mean, and avenge that loss, like you mentioned. They, ending the way that game did with McKenzie not getting out of bounds for them to at least have a chance at the field goal, and the lack of success they had in the red zone and the interceptions that Allen thrown. You definitely know that the Bills want to redeem themselves on this one.
Absolutely. So, Joe, let's consider some options here. Would you start Tom Brady versus Cincinnati, Deshaun Watson versus Baltimore, or our floor play of the week, Aaron Rodgers versus the Rams instead of Tua?
Yeah, I think I'd be willing to start all three. Brady's definitely the riskiest option against the Bengals, but I don't really expect much from Tua, so I'd be willing to go all three.
Yeah, I think I'd be willing to go all three. And I think you also, Joe, have one sneaky guy that you also would play instead of Tua, which I was a little surprised about.
Yeah, as scary as it sounds, I'd be willing to roll out Matty Ice against the Vikings. The Vikings secondary Goff just threw almost 400 yards last week against them, and I think that I think Ryan is good enough to exploit the secondary, and Pittman and Alec Pierce get involved with tight ends and Paris Campbell as well. More importantly, it's in a dome and don't worry about snow.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a risky play for sure, but that's where if you're chasing the points and you're a team that is kind of the underdog going into a matchup in the playoffs, it might be worth it to pivot to a guy like Matt Ryan, who's probably available on your wire, possibly in redraft leagues.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, with him getting benched and not playing that well, he probably is.
Yeah, so transitioning over to the running backs now, Joe, and this honestly is there's some players that just are the definition of a ceiling play, and I think this is a guy that has definitely been a ceiling play all year this year. But it's running back Miles Sanders going up at Chicago.
Yeah, unfortunately, this guy is our ceiling play of the week as I'm going against him in the Dynasty League, but he's got a great matchup with the Chicago Bears. And I think he just builds on the week that he just had last week and just continues on the hot streak there.
Yeah, he's just one of those, you just never know, that offense has so many weapons, it seems like, and Hurts, and who knows, man, he could be the MVP this year, which is so hard to believe. And with his running ability, he's able to take a lot of attempts and carries away from Miles Sanders. But I mean, he balled out last week, and like you said, at Chicago, it's a juicy matchup for him. And, but there's a possibility that it's a little bit risky because Sanders, it's not a guarantee that he's going to get a huge amount of points. It's usually boom or bust with him, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like you mentioned, it's just a matter of is Hurts going to keep onto the ball, or is he actually going to give Sanders the opportunity like he did last week and carry the ball? Or, they always, Kenneth Gainwell is always a kind of a threat to get involved, or they utilize Boston Scott. But it does seem like they've been giving a little bit more of the opportunities with Sanders. But yeah, like you mentioned, it's always kind of a risk. Will he get the bulk of the workload for sure?
Yeah, so our floor play of the week, and we were kind of waffling on this one, Joe, but ultimately we decided, we should go with them. But running back Isiah Pacheco, he's going up at Houston, which we know Houston's a juicy matchup.
Yeah, definitely. We're just going back and forth. I mean, partly because, Pacheco, he's been getting around the 15 touches, but then McKinnon was on the field for a lot of the game against the Broncos, but then he didn't really get carries. It was really more on the receiving end. So that gave us a little more confidence to give Pacheco our floor of the week here. I mean, he still had 13 carries last week for 70 yards. So, and then against the Texans, you mentioned it, they are the worst run defense.
And he might only need 15 carries for one of those carries to be an explosive carry because he's an explosive guy, so he takes one cut and he could go all the way to the end zone. So, and, because they're so bad with their run defense, you don't even have to you really worry about the idea of Mahomes possibly throwing for like 4 touchdowns because, well, I think you were telling me something crazy about the Texans pass defense.
Yeah. I was telling you that they haven't allowed a quarterback to throw 2 touchdown passes against them.
Yeah, which is unreal. I would never, when you told me that, I was like, you would think they're the worst team in the league. Like, how is that possible? But their run defense is just that bad.
Yeah, it's that bad where you really don't have to throw on them. But then when you do try, I mean, you saw for a lot of the game, even Prescott and the Cowboys with their weapons were struggling to pass and move the ball down the field that way.
Yeah, so Joe, our sit of the week, and this is a guy that, man, I don't feel like we can make heads or tails with him. But our sit of the week is running back DeAndre Swift going up at the Jets.
Hate to keep picking on Swift, and we've talked about him a lot this year, but I just, for playing a fantasy playoff week, I just don't see how you can rely on starting this guy this week against the Jets defense. Last week, seeing how much Justin Jackson was utilized, Jamal Williams still getting carries as well. I think there's better options out there.
That was just surprising to me, anyways. I don't know about you, but I think if I recall, we thought Swift was going to be the possible ceiling of the week because it looked like he was going to be the guy. Like it looks like he's finally healthy. So here he comes, and then what do you know? Justin Jackson starts getting involved. He's just one of those guys. He has the talent, but because of I don't know what his involved like his lack of volume and then his injuries is really making him hard to rely on right now.
Yeah, definitely. And if you made it this far and you're playing in your playoffs, you got to have it every week to advance. I just think you just can't rely on the guy, and I think it's just better to possibly move on than even leave him in there for the chance. I mean, he's a complete ceiling player. But
Absolutely.
then there's a chance like last week where he only gets you like 5 points, and you just can't have that as your RB1 or 2.
No, I mean, he really is a ceiling play. So if you're chasing the points, you're considering him. But let's talk about some other options, Joe. Would you start him? I'm sorry, would you start these other guys instead? Brian Robinson versus the Giants, Rachaad White versus Cincinnati, or J.K. Dobbins at Cleveland?
Yeah, I actually like all 3 of those guys as better options than Swift this week.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where I think, Robinson's a pretty solid floor play. I think he's going to give you a bankable amount of points. Dobbins, he had a really good week last week. Looked really impressive. So if he gets around 15 carries again, I like what he could do with it. He's also kind of we'll find out. It's too early yet, but I feel like he's kind of been a ceiling player as well. Rachaad White, I'm a little bit iffy on because you just don't know with the timeshare of him and Fournette. But it's it's really an indictment on Swift because I really feel like I can't trust him.
Yeah, definitely it is. And I do like the upside with Rachaad White and his utilization in the passing game. So he's still been a little more reliable, I feel like, for that Bucs offense than just the mystery of DeAndre Swift. He gets the bulk of the work the 1 week, and then all of a sudden we're seeing Justin Jackson, and they're just, at least it's Fournette and Rachaad White, and then that's the end. But then, you mentioned Dobbins, and he's got another juicy matchup with facing the Browns defense this week. So,
yeah, absolutely. So transitioning over to the receivers now, our ceiling play of the week, which, Joe, this guy is the epitome of a ceiling play. It's wide receiver Mike Williams. He's going up against the Titans.
With the matchup, like you said, he is a complete ceiling play. He's the deep threat guy, and you saw just what a difference it made last week against the Dolphins, the Chargers having him back. Just saw Herbert look better, and that offense really just kind of flow a lot better. And then, against the Titans secondary, I think he's a solid ceiling play this week.
And the thing with making him a ceiling play is there's so many weapons on that offense. It's not a guarantee that he's going to get the target share that you need in order for him to really perform. But he could. But I think, especially going up against the Titans, it's well worth it. If I had to guess, I mean, Keenan Allen is getting targeted like crazy these past 2 weeks. I think he's going to continue to get that target share. The question is, does a Palmer or Gerald Everett or Austin Eckler end up having a good receiving game versus Williams? That's a tough call, Joe, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, that's the thing with Williams, but he's just such a great contested catch guy. I think Herbert just has so much trust in him to throw that jump ball 1-on-1 versus a guy like Palmer. But there's no doubt Williams being on there definitely opens up the field for guys like Palmer, the DeAndre Carters, and Gerald Everett's of the world.
Yeah, so our floor play of the week, Joe, which could come to a surprise for folks because he's had an up and down season. But it's a situational game, fantasy football is, and we really like this matchup. But wide receiver Michael Pittman at Minnesota in the Dome.
Michael Pittman's been pretty disappointing overall most of the year. But against the matchup against the Vikings, just saw the Lions being able to really exploit it with multiple options against the Vikings last week. And I like him to have a solid game. He's not the big down the field threat for those big plays. That's why we're not calling him a ceiling play. But he's especially in PPR leagues, he's just going to be a safe floor option for you.
Yeah, he's a guy I've been down on most of the year, but you have to look at the situation for what it is. And like you were just saying, Joe, I couldn't agree with you more. He's not a deep ball guy. He should get a good amount of targets. Could end up getting you a touchdown as well. Minnesota is one of the worst pass defenses in the league. So, definitely a safer option for you than a lot of other options. And our sit of the week, Joe, this guy's had a bad track record over the past few weeks, but it's wide receiver Mike Evans going up against Cincinnati.
Yeah, it has been a rough few weeks. I mean, has had some rough matchups. Last week against the 49ers is really rough matchup, but unfortunately for him, if it wasn't for a holding call, he would have had that deep touchdown.
Right.
But the Bengals have been a pretty tough defense as well, and I think they might be able to take away Evans. Cam Taylor-Britt just played pretty well against Cooper last week, and I think this is maybe more of a Chris Godwin game than an Evans game.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it just hasn't been reliable. I did see something on Twitter. I think I saw that. I think out of any player over the past few weeks, he's like the most amount of points that he could have had, if not for taken back by penalty. He was the one in the lead. So he definitely, unfortunately, because of penalties, whether it's holding or whatever else, he just hasn't been able to have those stats, unfortunately. And, I think I have to see it to believe it. And Cincinnati isn't necessarily the best matchup. That Tampa Bay offense has not been clicking. So that's why he falls as our sit of the week. But, Joe, here's some other options for you. Would you start Deontay Johnson at Carolina, Marquise Brown at Denver, or Gabe Davis versus Miami?
I definitely wouldn't start Hollywood Brown over him. I'm not a big fan of Hollywood Brown and Broncos defense, Colt McCoy at quarterback. I think at that point I just got to roll with Evans. But I think, even you mentioned the first guy you mentioned is a little risky, I feel like, too.
Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, well, only if Deontay Johnson plays. I know he's been missing some practices with a hip injury. If he plays, I'd start him over Evans. And I'd also be willing to start the other guy over Evans as well.
Gabe Davis versus Miami.
Yeah, I'd roll the dice with Gabe Davis against Miami.
Interesting.
As well over.
Okay, I would play Gabe Davis versus Miami because I think he is a ceiling play, but I think it would be I'm more intrigued with his ceiling than Evans' ceiling at this point. So that's what would outweigh there. Deontay Johnson, if he plays, he's a good floor option. I agree. I wouldn't play Marquise Brown. How about a few other options, Joe? Would you play Donovan Peoples-Jones versus Baltimore, DJ Moore versus Pittsburgh, or Drake London at New Orleans? And that's Desmond Ridder as the quarterback.
Yeah. I think DJ, do we have an update on DJ Moore?
I think he's playing.
He's going to play?
Yeah.
I think I'd be comfortable starting just not starting London over. I just don't think I could play London over Evans, but the other two I'd be comfortable with.
Yeah, Peoples-Jones is really it seems like him and Watson are actually doing pretty well. Looks like he is questionable, DJ Moore, as of right now, based on when we're filming this video. I would be willing to start DJ Moore over Mike Evans if he is healthy, but if he doesn't play, obviously you got to play Evans. I like Peoples-Jones, and I agree with you. I wouldn't start London either. So going over to our tight ends, Joe. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Saints defense is tough, and then coupled with like you mentioned, Ritter being the quarterback. Although it's got to be tough to be worse than Mariota, but still want to at least see it for a week.
Yeah, so going over to the tight ends, Joe, our ceiling play of the week is your man, Greg Dulcich versus Arizona.
Yeah, I think might be surprised we're still recommending Dulcich with Rippon at quarterback, but I think Rippon could be capable to at least still be able to exploit the Cardinals defense, who's just them and Seattle Seahawks have been the two worst defenses all year against tight ends, and I know Rippon's not going to stop me now from exploiting that matchup.
And Sutton's not going to be coming back, they don't think, right?
It's questionable. He really hasn't been practicing. I think at this point I'd be surprised to see him out there playing.
Yeah, I'd feel a little bit worse if he was playing. But like you said, the matchup is so good, and tight end is such a shot in the dark that, I think he's really a good ceiling option this week. Our floor of the week is the guy we've been talking about recently, our favorite, Joe, Chigoziem Okonkwo. He's going up at the Chargers.
Yeah, definitely. Okonkwo, the last few weeks, he's been at least getting 5 targets, which I think is making him a safe play to be our floor play this week. And, with his athletic ability, he's got the ability to kind of be a ceiling play all in one. But with the target share, and then he got some red zone targets last week, so gets a touchdown. I mean, he's a fine floor play, and Chargers defense is banged up. See if Derwin James and like Bryce Callahan come back, but with the matchup, I definitely like him.
And the thing I like about him too is, especially later on in the year, you start to see teams allow opportunities for their young rookies that they've drafted. And Austin Hooper is not in their future. I think, with a 1-year deal left, I'd be very surprised if they brought him back. So you're starting to see Chig get more and more involved in the offense. And like you said, I like that target share, getting at least over 5 targets a game these past 3 games. He's definitely on the rise. And I think he's a great option compared to a lot of other ones out there when it comes to the tight end position.
Yeah, we're getting chiggy with it.
I like it, Joe. That's good. That's real good. Getting chiggy with it. We got to keep that now. All right. Yeah. So our sit of the week is tight end Tyler Higbee, and he's going up at Green Bay on Monday night, Joe.
Yeah, I think this is a guy who's really been struggling the last few weeks. If you're hopefully you've got a pivot plan to swing for the guy, but if you don't, definitely don't play him. And we'll mention some names that you should start instead for sure.
Yeah. So would you start? Because I agree with you. Absolutely. I never feel like Baker's ever really targeted the tight end to begin with, but
no, anyway, I liked the matchup last week better against Vegas, and he still only had 3 targets, 2 catches for like 15 yards, so that's kind of been his baseline the last few weeks. Just can't trust him.
Exactly. So would you start tight end Cole Kmet versus a tough Eagles defense, Tyler Conklin versus Detroit, or would you play Dawson Knox versus Miami?
Yeah, I'd be starting all 3 of those guys over him.
Yeah, I would too. The only one I'm kind of struggling with is Conklin. That one's a toss-up for me because
like we mentioned, though, I think Zach Wilson might actually help Conklin. I think the receivers could take a hit, but Conklin was a guy, even with Zach Wilson at quarterback, he was still performing, where Mike White's really elevated the receivers.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that at all, but I would have told you that Garrett Wilson is an automatic start. I'm not saying I'm not starting him. I still probably am if I have him, but he's not the automatic guy that I was saying he was now that Zach Wilson's quarterback.
Yeah, the other thing it changes for me is, I was also like the prospect of the potential of Elijah Moore this week against the Lions, especially if Corey Davis was going to be out. But now that Zach Wilson's out there, I'm off of Moore.
Yeah, absolutely. People don't realize how stingy the Lions have been. I think I could see the Lions overwhelming the Jets, honestly, coming up. I think they play on Sunday, right?
Yes, it's a Sunday 1:00 game. Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was our starts and sits for week 15 for week 1 of your fantasy football playoffs. We're a new channel. We try to create several videos on a weekly basis, so you could support us by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and hitting the notification bell. Like I mentioned, we try to create several videos, and coming up in the off season, we're really going to dive in and focus on Dynasty content. So if you don't know what Dynasty is about, or you want to get more involved in it, this would be the channel to come visit, because we'll be talking about a whole bunch of Dynasty related things. So we're definitely looking forward to that. And if you have any comments, go ahead and put them below. Do you have some players that you're wondering whether you should start or sit them this week? We're happy to give you our advice. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time.